broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone. This is Wayne Callan for Attitude Magazine. Glad you can be with us. As we all know, raising children diagnosed with ADHD and/or ODD is very, very challenging. Most of us have yet to find a parenting approach to meet all of those challenges. We wake up with the best of intentions each day. I won't yell or snap back at my child. I will listen closely to what he has to say and what he is feeling. I will get through the day without conflict. But after a few hours, we tend to fall back on the only approaches we've used to raise our kid: yelling, confrontation, issuing consequences, and resenting that our kids are so defiant. Let's be honest, it's a very tough job for parents to stay cool and calm when your son or daughter is cursing at you or ignoring your words, especially when you've had a tough day at the office and have a million things to do at home. On the other hand, with the right approach, perhaps we could do a better job of getting to the bottom of our child's actions and behaviors. But who has the time or patience when we are being pulled in so many directions? We are pleased to have Dr. Ross Greene with us today to give us a different perspective on all of this. Dr. Greene is the originator of the Collaborative and Proactive Solutions approach, or CPS. Most of you probably know about this, but for those who don't, CPS is based on the premise that challenging behavior occurs when the expectations being placed on a child exceed the kid's capacity to respond adaptively, and that some kids lack the skills to handle certain demands and expectations. Dr. Greene is the founding director of the nonprofit Lives in the Balance. He is on the adjunct faculty in the Department of Psychology at Virginia Tech and in the Faculty of Science at the University of Technology in Sydney, Australia. Dr. Greene has worked with several thousand behaviorally challenging kids and their families using the CPS model. His most recent book is Raising Human Beings. Dr. Greene will give us an in-depth presentation about his parenting approach, and then he will take your questions. But first, we'd like to invite you to take a quick poll. What skill is the most challenging for your teen? Executive skills, language processing, communication skills, emotion regulation skills, cognitive flexibility skills, social skills. While you're taking the poll, I'll do a little housekeeping. If you're new to our webinars, post your questions for Dr. Greene in the box at the right on your screen. You can also download today's slides from the control panel at the right of your screen. Now, if we have them, we can take a look at the poll results. So 38% for executive skills, 4% language processing. The highest is emotional regulation skills, not surprisingly. Cognitive flexibility skills, 7%. Social skills, 8%. Well, I don't think there are any real surprises there. But anyway, I'll turn the webinar over to Dr. Greene now. Ross, it's great to have you here today.
Thank you again for having me do it and for your patience with me and making sure that this happens. You know, the poll was interesting because while every kid diagnosed with ADHD is guaranteed to be lacking executive skills, it is the emotional outbursts that occur when the kid gets frustrated and we get frustrated that tend to be what tears apart families and makes it so difficult for us to have a good relationship and good communication with our children. And so the poll results, I agree, not terribly surprising. A big part of what causes frustration is when we are using power and control to try to get a child to meet expectations that the child is having difficulty meeting. And so the key to my life's work is to help caregivers move from power and control strategies to strategies that are more about collaboration and problem solving, I find that it greatly diminishes the emotional outbursts that occur when kids are having difficulty meeting expectations, and greatly enhances the ability of the kid to meet those expectations. It all depends on how you approach it. And so with that in mind, let's see if the slides will advance. And there we go. There are 6 key themes that embody the collaborative and proactive solutions model. These are 6 key themes, but there are also 6 big shifts. They, as I always say, shift the way we are viewing things and shift the way we are doing things. These are not in order of importance, but probably in sequential order. So here goes. First of all, many parents, educators, and mental health clinicians are primarily focused on a challenging kid's challenging behavior and trying to modify that behavior. And that is not what you're doing in the CPS model. The CPS model, you are instead focused on the problems that are causing that behavior and solving them. This is a problem-solving model, not a behavior modification model. In this model, behavior is just the signal, just the fever, just the means by which a child is communicating. I'm stuck. There are expectations I'm having difficulty meeting. If all we're focused on is modifying a child's behavior, then all we're doing is modifying the signal, the fever, but we're not solving any problems that way. And that's why I refer to this model as an upstream model. Behavior, that's what's floating to you downstream. The problems that are causing those behaviors, that's what's waiting for you upstream. In this model, you are paddling furiously upstream to try to identify the problems that are waiting for you there. Because one thing's for certain, if we do not identify those problems, they definitely won't get solved. That's key theme number 1. In this model, you're a problem solver, not a behavior modifier. The good news is behaviors are not the only observable piece of data. Many of us were taught that behavior is the only thing that's observable, the only thing that's objective, the only thing that's quantifiable, but the problems that are causing those behaviors are just as observable, just as objective, just as quantifiable. In this model, we call those problems unsolved problems, also known as problems that have yet to be solved, also known as problems that are waiting to be solved. Waiting for who? Waiting for you, the caregiver. But first you have to identify them, and then you have to know how to solve them. So speaking of how to solve them, let's move on to key themes number 2, 3, and 4. Key theme number 2. We adults tend to be real keen on problem solving of the unilateral kind. That's where the adult decides what the solution is and imposes it on the kid. It's also not what you're doing in this model. In this model, we operate on a very important assumption. If you want to solve a problem with a kid, especially a behaviorally challenging one, but any kid, you're going to need a teammate. You're going to need a partner. Who's your partner? The kid. And generally speaking, the kid is delighted to help you out. He or she has been wondering for a very long time, how come we adults keep trying to solve problems without any information from the kid, without any input from the kid, without any sign-off from the kid? This is problem solving of the collaborative kind. It's something you're doing with the kid, not to him. Key theme number 3. Now that we are solving problems collaboratively, we need to think about our timing. As most caregivers can appreciate, a great deal of the intervention that occurs for behaviorally challenging kids takes place in the heat of the moment, emergently, reactively. Not in this model. 99.9% of what you're doing in this model is planned, proactive? Now come the big questions. How can we be planned and proactive when we never know when the kid's going to blow? When he always blows up from out of the blue? When he's so unpredictable? The answers: he's not unpredictable. He's not blowing up from out of the blue. We know exactly when he's going to get upset if we answer two questions right up front. And those two questions are why and when. As in, why are challenging kids challenging? Why is this challenging kid challenging? When are challenging kids challenging? When is this challenging kid challenging? Now we're going to get to those in a second, but I'm sorry to report that those are not the questions that people often spend most of their time trying to answer. Those questions begin with the word what, as in, what behaviors is the kid exhibiting when he or she is having difficulty meeting expectations? And another what question: what psychiatric disorder does the kid meet diagnostic criteria for on the basis of the behaviors the kid is exhibiting when he or she is having difficulty meeting expectations? Those what questions are not going to give us the information we need about why and when. While I appreciate the fact that many caregivers, many parents, have found a diagnosis to be helpful because it validates the fact that they thought that there was something different about their child, and maybe even help them learn a little bit more about their child, I actually think we are too diagnostically oriented. Diagnoses don't answer why, and diagnoses don't answer when. If we needed all those, I don't think we need all those categories. In other words, I think we only need two categories. I think as it relates to the behaviors kids and other human beings exhibit to communicate that they're having difficulty meeting expectations, I think you're either lucky or you're unlucky. Those are our two categories. Now hear me out. What are lucky ways of communicating that you're having difficulty meeting expectations? Well, let's start with the holy grail of lucky: using your words. It doesn't get any better than that. But also whining, pouting, sulking, withdrawing, crying. Why are those ways of communicating that you're having difficulty meeting expectations lucky? Well, because those ways of communicating that are not going to get you popped into timeout, not going to get you deprived of privileges, not going to have you kept in from recess, not going to give you a detention, nor a suspension, nor an expulsion, not going to get you hit, not going to get you thrown into a locked, padded room, not going to get you pinned to the ground by 2 to 4 big adults. And those ways of communicating that you're having difficulty meeting expectations, best of all, are highly likely to elicit empathy from your caregivers. What a lucky kid. But I haven't been working with lucky kids for the last 40 years. I've been working with unlucky kids, and now a synonym, unlucky and behaviorally challenging, are synonyms. I use them interchangeably. I actually think unlucky tells the tale better. What are unlucky ways of communicating that you're having difficulty meeting expectations? I'm not going to be exhaustive here. I'm sure most of our listeners already know, but here we go. At the mild end, screaming, swearing, but also hitting, spitting, biting, kicking, throwing, destroying, running. Worse, behaviors that are severely injurious to oneself or others: cutting, self-induced vomiting, drinking to excess, drugging to excess, ending one's own life or trying, ending somebody else's life or trying. Why are those ways of communicating that you're having difficulty meeting expectations unlucky? Well, because those ways at the mild end are going to get you thrown into timeout, are going to get you deprived of recess. Less lucky still are going to get you a detention, suspension, expulsion, hit, pinned to the ground, thrown into a padded room. And worst of all, those ways of communicating that you're having difficulty meeting expectations are far less likely to elicit empathy from your caregivers. Why are challenging kids challenging? Because they're lacking the skills to not be challenging. That's what we've learned from the research that has accumulated over the last 40 to 50 years. Challenging behavior is not about poor motivation. It's about lagging skills. When are challenging kids challenging? When expectations outstrip skills. And that, as I always say, is the great leveler of the playing field, because we all look bad when expectations outstrip skills. And as the field of developmental psychopathology tells us, whether a kid is communicating that he or she is having difficulty meeting expectations in ways that are lucky or unlucky, the behavior is communicating the exact same thing. I'm stuck. There are expectations I'm having difficulty meeting. If all we're focused on is modifying the kid's behavior, we will never focus on helping the kid meet the expectations and understanding what's getting in the way of the kid being able to do that. Key theme number 4, understanding comes before helping. Boy, do we take 10 giant leaps forward when we finally come to view the kid's difficulties through the prism of lagging skills and unsolved problems. Our humanity starts to shine through. Our compassion starts to shine through. We stop saying things like, he's pushing my buttons, he's yanking my chain, he's making bad choices, he could do it if he wanted to. He's lacking skills. There are expectations he's having difficulty meeting. Key theme number 5, if people have read any of my books, then they know this theme. It's the key theme of my work. Kids do well if they can. It's the belief that if this kid could do well, he would do well. And that if he's not doing well, something must be getting in his way. And that the single biggest favor a potential helper, parent, educator, mental health professional, staff member at a facility, the biggest favor a potential helper can do an unlucky kid is to be the person who finally figures out what's been getting in the kid's way. What are the kid's lagging skills? What expectations is the kid having difficulty meeting? What are his unsolved problems? But kids do well if they can is not what we've been thinking for most of human evolution, but that's because for most of human evolution, we didn't have the research that's accumulated over the last 40 to 50 years. What have we been thinking for most of human evolution? All you got to do is change one word and you've got kids do well if they wanna. Kids do well if they can and kids do well if they wanna are two completely different mentalities. If you have a kids do well if they wanna mentality and you're working with a kid who's not doing well, then the reason you think he's not doing well is because he doesn't wanna do well. He wants to do poorly. Well, there are actually lots of cliches that we often apply to unlucky kids to justify our belief that he wants to do poorly. Attention-seeking, manipulative, coercive, unmotivated, limit testing. These are all things that are often said about unlucky kids that are not true, but that simply justify our belief that he doesn't wanna do well. And what do you do to a kid if you think he doesn't wanna do well? You make him wanna do well. And how do you do that? You reward the behaviors you like so as to see more of them. You punish the behaviors you don't like so as to see less of them. and you are now in the business of making a kid want to do well, and you're also entirely focused on the signal, the fever, not in this model. In this model, we're figuring out why this kid isn't doing well, lagging skills. When this kid isn't doing well, unsolved problems, unmet expectations. Finally, key theme number 6, doing well is preferable. Now, for me, that's a statement of the obvious. Of course, doing well is preferable. Everybody I know prefers doing well. That's why they do well most of the time. So do unlucky kids. Unlucky kids prefer doing well too. The difference between a well-behaved kid and an unlucky kid is not that the well-behaved kid prefers doing well and the unlucky kid doesn't. That's a fallacy. I find that unlucky kids often want to do well even more than many of them because they've been having such a hard time getting there. Now, I agree, many of the kids that I've worked with didn't look like they preferred doing well anymore, but they weren't born that way. These are the kids who've been so overcorrected, so overdirected, so overpunished for so long. Many of them have thrown in the towel on doing well. They don't think it's in the cards. But here's what I find. When we apply these 6 key themes, when we apply the strategies that you'll be hearing about briefly next, we find that we all along had a kid for whom doing well was preferable. He was just having a really hard time getting there, and he was hoping that we'd be able to figure out why and when. What skills does the research tell us behaviorally challenging kids are lacking? Here's the list of categories: executive skills, language processing and communication skills, emotion regulation skills, cognitive flexibility skills, social skills. These are the skills that unlucky kids have been found in the research to be lacking. Now, the interesting thing is, you actually want to move beyond these categories and move to the specific skills. These are not specific skills. These are categories of skills. We want to move beyond the categories and get to the specific skills the kid is lacking. That's when he starts to make sense to us. That's when we start to view him through more compassionate, accurate, productive lenses. That's when we start figuring out what it is that we need to work on. That's when we stop taking the behavior personally and recognize this kid is lacking skills. Here's some more skills often found lacking in unlucky kids, but also, perhaps especially these days, most human beings. These are the skills that foster the better side of human nature, and these are the skills I talk about mostly in the book that Wayne mentioned in the beginning, Raising Human Beings. It's the most recent book. Empathy, appreciating how one's behavior is affecting others, resolving disagreements without conflict, taking another person's perspective, honesty. When these skills are present, we see the better side of human nature. When these skills are absent, we see the ugly side of human nature. And there have been many developments in schools and in families over the past 20 to 30 years that have made it more difficult for parents and educators to be the socialization agents that they have always been. These skills need to be taught explicitly. They need to be modeled. And we need to give kids as much opportunity for practicing them as we possibly can. Otherwise, we should not be surprised if we see these skills deteriorating. What are the 2 most important roles that a potential helper can play in the life of an unlucky kid, or quite frankly, any kid who's struggling? 2 roles. Role number 1, figure out what skills this kid is lacking, so you have the right lenses on. Figure out what expectations this kid is having difficulty meeting. what are his unsolved problems, so you know what problems need to be solved. Thing number 2, start solving those problems collaboratively and proactively. And when we are solving problems collaboratively and proactively, we are buying ourselves a partner, the kid. No reason for adults to be flying solo on this. You got a partner, a teammate. When you are solving problems collaboratively and proactively, you are engaging kids in solving the problems that affect their lives. As I'm always asking, why would you want to leave the kid out of the loop on that? That's one of the most important skills a caregiver could teach. When you're solving problems collaboratively and proactively, you and the kid together are coming up with solutions that are a whole lot more effective and a whole lot more durable. And here's what the research is telling us. When you are solving problems collaboratively and proactively, you are not only significantly improving the child's behavior, by the way, every bit as much as you would be if you were using rewards and punishments, but you are also simultaneously, just through the process of solving problems collaboratively and proactively, teaching the child the skills he or she is lacking. This is a very important sheet of paper. You will find it on the Lives in the Balance website, the website of my nonprofit, livesinthebalance.org. It's called The Assessment of Lagging Skills and Unsolved Problems. It's going to help you figure out what a child's lagging skills and unsolved problems are. And because in this webinar, we don't have time for me to teach you how to use it, because that's about a 15 to 20 minute process, I'm going to tell you that on the Lives in the Balance website as well, both in the parent and families section, as well as in the educators and schools section, in the CPS resources section of the website, you will find a 45-minute audio program to teach you how to use the assessment of lagging skills and unsolved problems. If you want to get the right lenses on, you got to know what skills your kid is lacking. If you want to know what expectations your child is having difficulty meeting, what are his unsolved problems, what problems could you be busy solving with your child so as to both get them solved and reduce the behaviors that are being caused by those problems, you've got to identify them right up front. One sheet is going to do that for you in about 50 to 55 minutes. And here's what I'm always saying. Once we know what skills a kid is lacking, once we know what expectations the child is having difficulty meeting, that kid is highly predictable. And we won't be trying to deal with challenging behavior in the heat of the moment very often anymore. This is a very important sheet of paper. I hope you will take advantage of the free 45-minute audio program teaching you how to use it on the Lives in the Balance website. The time investment is worth it more than words can say. Oops, it went backwards. There we go. Once we identify those unsolved problems, we are ready to start solving them. And one of the things I did in The Explosive Child a very long time ago when it first came out is I identified 3 ways in which adults handle problems with kids. They are called Plan A, Plan B, and Plan C. You're really only using 2 of these plans in the CPS model. The third one is there just because it's popular. It's just there as a reference point. Plan C is where you are setting a particular problem aside, at least for now. Not because you are giving in, not because you are capitulating, but because you are prioritizing. If you use the assessment of lagging skills and unsolved problems to identify a kid's lagging skills and unsolved problems, you're going to find that many of these kids who've been exhibiting challenging behavior for a very long time often have 20, 30, 40, sometimes even 50 unsolved problems. You're not going to be able to solve them all at once, so you're going to have to prioritize. You're only going to pick 2 or 3 to work on initially. What are you going to do with the rest? You are going to set them aside for now. That's prioritizing. That's brilliant. Now, in the very volatile, unstable, reactive kids that I work with, Plan C is also stabilizing, because any expectation we've removed from the kid's radar screen for now won't be setting in motion a challenging episode. When will we get to those problems? After we get some of our higher priority unsolved problems solved. Now, yes, it's true. I find that we caregivers have a very difficult time suspending even a fraction of our agenda for the kid. Now, here's a true fact to help you feel more comfortable about that. The kid isn't meeting the expectation reliably anyways. So I guess my attitude is we can go in one of 2 different directions. I know which one I'd pick. We can have the kid not meet the expectation, but still expect him to meet the expectation and have a huge meltdown over it time after time. Or we can make it official. We don't even expect him to meet that expectation right now. We've removed it, and we won't have challenging behavior over it. Just remember, either way, he's not meeting the expectation anyhow. That leaves us with only 2 other plans, A and B. Both represent a way to solve a problem with a kid. There's just one huge difference between them. With Plan A, you're trying to solve the problem unilaterally. With Plan B, you're solving the problem collaboratively. In this model, you're solving problems using Plan B. Now, are we allergic to Plan A in this model? No, we just don't recommend it. If a kid is about to run in front of a speeding car in a parking lot, you're not doing Plan C. You're not saying, well, we're not working on that right now. It's too late for Plan B at that moment. You're doing Plan A. You're yanking on his arm. You save his life. If he blows up, so be it. But if 3 weeks later he's now walked in front of a speeding car in the parking lot 17 additional times, I will agree that Plan A is saving his life, but I also need to point out that Plan A is not solving that problem. You're going to need a different approach. Plan B. Plan B consists of 3 steps. Solving a problem collaboratively consists of 3 steps. And I want to remind everybody, because we've already used the assessment of lagging skills and unsolved problems, and because we've already prioritized, you're not using these 3 steps in the heat of the moment most of the time. You're using them proactively most of the time. The 3 steps are called the empathy step, the define adult concern step, and the invitation step. The names of the steps are nowhere nearly as important as the ingredients of each step. What is the main ingredient of the empathy step? The empathy step is where you are gathering information from the kid so as to get the clearest possible understanding of the kid's concern, perspective, point of view on this unsolved problem. As I'm always saying, kids have information we very badly need. What's hard, what's getting in the kid's way. As I'm always saying, your least fallible source of information on what's getting in a kid's way, on meeting a particular expectation, is the kid. We need info. The empathy step is where we're going to get it. The define adult concern step, this is where the adult is entering his or her concern into consideration on the exact same unsolved problem. We adults have very important concerns as well, regrettably. We often try to get those concerns addressed through use of Plan A. Now we're trying to get that concern addressed through use of Plan B. Same concern, completely different approach to getting it addressed. The invitation, this is where the kid and the caregiver are collaborating on a solution, but a solution that must meet 2 criteria. Got to be realistic, got to be mutually satisfactory. Realistic means both parties can truly do what they're agreeing to do. I cannot tell you how often I see caregivers signing off on solutions they already know the kid can't do. Mutually satisfactory means the solution has to address the concerns of both parties that we identified in the first 2 steps of Plan B. Here's what I'm always saying. If the solution isn't realistic and mutually satisfactory, I promise you, this problem is still unsolved. And that's not only borne out by my work with thousands of unlucky kids, it's been borne out by world history. Here's the myth. Adult-child conflict is inevitable. The reality. Kids and adults are going to disagree with each other, and kids are going to have difficulty meeting some expectations. The fallacy is that conflict has to result from those disagreements and unmet expectations. As you now know, it all comes down to how you're trying to solve those problems, and I should let people know that on the Lives in the Balance website, there is all kinds of streaming video to show you what it looks like to solve problems collaboratively with kids. Please take a look at those videos. They're all free. In this model, do you still have expectations? Of course you still have expectations. You can't raise kids without expectations. It's how you handle unmet expectations that matters. Now you know you have 2 choices, A and B. Unilateral versus collaborative. See, Plan A is about power. Power causes conflict. I think we caregivers really need to ask ourselves if power is really the primary ingredient we want to be using to have influence on our kids. Plan B is about collaboration. Collaboration brings people together. The most common complaint I get from kids, the adults won't listen to me. The most common complaint I get from adults, the kid won't talk to me. I don't think you're going to be hearing those complaints very often when you're solving problems collaboratively and proactively with kids. And now, 2 final questions. Why do the problems that affect kids' lives so often cause conflict between us and them? Now you know the answer. It all comes down to how we're going about trying to solve those problems. And question number 2, are the ways in which we are presently going about parenting, teaching, disciplining, and interacting with our kids, teaching the skills on the better side of human nature? If our primary ingredient is power, I would suggest that the answer to that question is no. If our primary ingredient is collaboration, well, we got research telling us that when you're solving problems collaboratively and proactively with kids, you are simultaneously teaching the skills on the better side of human nature. Here's 2 websites that are going to help you out a lot before we do questions. The Lives in the Balance website contains an absolute treasure trove of free information on this model. You'll also find information about our forthcoming documentary called The Kids We Lose. It's about how atrociously we treat kids in the United States and other countries as well, by a mere virtue of the fact that they are having difficulty meeting expectations in ways that are unlucky. The CPS Connection website contains a whole bunch of other trainings and workshops, if that's of interest to you. And that completes the formal part of my presentation. Let's do some questions.
Sure, that was excellent. Let's see. Are there such things as, there are a lot of little questions. People are a little confused. How do we find a CPS parenting coach? Is there such an animal? Is CPS taught in school?
At the moment, but there are certified providers in the CPS model all over the world, and people can find them listed on the CPS Connection website in the providers section. I wish I had somebody in every town and city in the world. We're certainly working on it, but we're not quite there yet. So what they're probably looking for is a mental health clinician who has trained with me and is certified in delivering the CPS model. And I think there's about 80 of them on the list of providers on the CPS Connection website. There will soon be about 20 more because we are just completing trainings in the United States and Sweden, Denmark. We're trying to do this all over the world so that we can make sure that there's somebody who knows to do this in every nook and cranny throughout the world. We're not quite there yet, but we're getting there.
Mm-hmm. Can CPS be used with kids who have a learning disability or autism as well?
We use the CPS model with any kid. A learning disability certainly wouldn't stand in the way. This is used with kids on the spectrum all the time. The learning disability that makes this a little bit more interesting and changes the way you're doing it would be kids who have significant difficulties in the language processing and communication realm. With them, especially if the spoken word is challenging for them, you'll have to find other ways to communicate with them besides the spoken word. Often we use hand signals, often we use pictures. In kids who are completely nonverbal, we use assistive technologies, but we're not going to let the fact that a kid is having difficulty expressing himself or understanding what we're saying keep him from participating in solving the problems that affect his or her life.
Mm-hmm. That's good, yeah. What happens, one parent is asking, he sits his kid down to collaborate with him, and the child answers to all the questions, I don't know. So the parent is trying to work things out, but not getting much cooperation. I don't know if you have any strategies for this parent.
I don't know can mean many different things, but before we get to I don't know, and people will learn about this in the that 45-minute video I was talking about where they can learn how to use the assessment of lagging skills and unsolved problems. It's really important to use the right words to approach the kid. You're only talking with the kid about the expectation he's having difficulty meeting. You are not talking with the kid about the challenging behavior that is being caused by that unmet expectation. Often, when we try talking with kids about their challenging behavior, they shut right down on us because they think they're in trouble, they get defensive, and they don't communicate. So we really need to make sure that we are starting with a well-worded unsolved problem, and people will learn how to do that in the 45-minute recording. It's also possible that we're trying to do this in the heat of the moment, which means we've added heat and rush to the mix. So it all depends on when we are sitting the kid down. This is intended to be proactive, not something we do in the heat of the moment or immediately following the heat of the moment. But that's why we want to use the LSIP to identify unsolved problems proactively, and that's why we want to prioritize so that we're only working on 2 or 3 things at any given point in time. But I don't know can also mean I haven't thought about my concerns in a very long time because I've become so accustomed to having them get blown off the table. I don't know could mean I don't trust you or this process yet because adults in my life have never really listened to me and they've given me good reason not to trust them. I don't know could mean I don't have the words. I don't know could mean a lot of different things. But just a strategy here that I often use, if all of those things that I've just mentioned have been taken care of or are not coming into play, what I'm doing is I'm teaching the kid 5 fingers. 5 means very true, 4 means pretty true, 3 means sort of true, 2 means not very true, 1 means not true at all. And then I'm making statements so that the kid doesn't have to respond verbally. All the kid has to do is hold up fingers to let me know how true my statement is. And in kids that I get a lot of I don't knows from, I find that this very simple strategy is often extraordinarily effective at getting me the information I'm looking for.
Yeah, that's excellent. That's I could see how that would work. One parent whose son has ADHD is asking, will taking medication help the CPS approach be better received by her son?
It certainly might. Oops, go ahead.
No, that's it. That's the question.
It certainly might help the kid be more available for the problem-solving process to take place. As you might imagine, a high percentage of the thousands of behaviorally challenging kids I've worked with over the last 40 years had a diagnosis of ADHD. Certainly they were, if they were responding well to their medication, it was easier to have a Plan B discussion with them while they were medicated because they were more attentive and less hyperactive. But I've also done Plan B with a meaningful number of kids who weren't medicated and were very hyperactive and inattentive. A kid who I used to work with, I used to call her the upside down kid. She treated the couch in my office like parallel bars, and most of our discussions took place with her standing on her head. So her feet were up in the air and her head was down on the carpet. And we had some very productive conversations that way. I've had many productive conversations with kids diagnosed with ADHD as they crawled around my office. It's not necessarily going to go so seamlessly, but you can have a Plan B discussion with a kid who's hyperactive and impulsive and inattentive. But if we've got medication that's working for us, it's certainly easier to have those conversations while the kid is medicated. Here's an interesting point, though. If we're coming up with solutions, we need to make sure that those solutions are realistic. You've already heard that criteria, but we need to make sure that the solution takes into account the times when the kid is likely to be medicated and the times when the kid is likely to be unmedicated. We can't come up with a solution that's realistic while the kid is medicated and expect the solution to be realistic when the kid is unmedicated. So that's an interesting medication piece as it relates to solutions.
Mm-hmm. What's a good way? A lot of parents have asked, what is a good way to sort of open a CPS problem-solving session with your kid?
You say to your kid, you know what, there's something I would love to understand better than I do. Is there a time that you and I could have a little discussion so you could help me understand something? You're not in trouble. I'm not mad at you. There's just something I want to understand a little bit better than I do. And then it's always a good idea to tell the kid what it is that you'd like more information about. Otherwise, while you may be having the discussion with the kid proactively, you've sprung the problem on him, and so it still feels like it's taking place in the heat of the moment to the kid. So I like making an appointment, and I like giving kids advance warning of what it is that we'd like more information on. No surprises, all proactive. The ALSUP should make that possible. Prioritizing should make that possible. But once again, a big part of this model is aimed at getting people out of the heat of the moment, because quite frankly, very little good happens in the heat of the moment. And quite frankly, no one can really give people a great strategy for what to use in the heat of the moment, besides our usual crisis management strategies: defuse, de-escalate, keep everybody safe. The bad news for kids is that a lot of the worst things adults do to kids often takes place in the heat of the moment, when the adult is hot as well. The whole goal is to get out of the heat of the moment. The ALSUP makes that possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this parent sounds like she's in a crisis moment. She says, I'm at a loss to even know where to start with my son who has ODD. He is physically threatened me. I don't know how to begin the CPS process to change his aggressive behavior.
The CPS process begins with completing the assessment of lagging skills and unsolved problems. But my advice to that mom is get on the Lives in the Balance website, go to the CPS resources section on the top nav bar, go to the parents and families section in the CPS resources section, and take the walking tour. It's the first thing in that section. That's where all that streaming video and audio programming can be found, and that is a very good introduction to the CPS model. But there is no escaping identifying a kid's lagging skills and unsolved problems. If we don't do that, the kid is still unpredictable, and we still find ourselves in the heat of the moment, time after time.
A parent asks, let's say the parent and the child come up with a solution, but the child doesn't follow through. What's next?
Apparently it wasn't as realistic and mutually satisfactory as we thought it was.
Yeah.
Next is going back to plan B to figure out how come that solution didn't work. And it could be for one of three reasons. I've already mentioned two of them. Reason number one, we thought it was realistic, but it wasn't. That's not a plan B fail. That is a reason to go back to plan B to figure out what wasn't realistic about that solution and come up with one that is more realistic. Possibility number two, it wasn't as mutually satisfactory as we thought it was. We thought it was, but it wasn't. That is not a plan B fail. That's a reason to go back to plan B and come up with a solution that is going to address the concerns of both parties. And possibility number three is that we didn't hear all of the concerns on this unsolved problem. Our solution could only address the concerns we heard about. It would not address the concerns we did not hear about. Back to plan B to see if there are concerns we didn't hear about. I sometimes have caregivers say to me, should I punish the kid for a solution that doesn't work? And I'm always looking at them and saying, well, didn't y'all both come up with the solution? We're not going to punish you, are we?
Right. So another, I mean, I guess this might be a word game, but does discipline have a place in this model?
This is discipline. The
Right.
definition of discipline is teaching. The question is, what kind of teacher do we want to be? And really this comes down to, is the only thing we want to be doing as disciplinarians modifying behavior, which as people have now heard is just the signal, just the fever. I'm stuck. There are expectations I'm having difficulty meeting. Or do we want discipline instead to mean I and my child are solving problems together? We're doing it collaboratively and proactively. We are seeing significantly less challenging behavior because it's only unsolved problems that cause challenging behavior. Solved problems don't. The big question is, what kind of teacher do you want to be?
Another question from a mom, how do we get a spouse on board who's reluctant to let go of handling issues, quote unquote, with power? Actually, we've gotten quite a few of these about spouses who are on different ends of the spectrum on this. Go ahead.
A very common issue. You know, I've worked with a lot of parents, obviously, who weren't on board in the beginning. But I find that helping a parent come to recognize, number one, that their child is lacking skills. This isn't about attitude. This isn't about motivation. This is about lagging skills. And when we help identify the specific expectations that a kid is having difficulty meeting and point out to the parent, your kid isn't exhibiting challenging behavior all the time. Kid is only exhibiting challenging behavior in conditions in which certain skills are being demanded of him, the skills he or she is lacking. And punishing your kid and doing it in the heat of the moment isn't teaching any of those skills and isn't solving any of those problems. I find that that's very persuasive for many parents. And then if we show them, if you do things in this way, and if we can show them that things are going to go a whole lot better, then we've got them. But here's the interesting thing. You know, when parents come to see me in my office, it's not because things are going really well. It's because things are going really poorly. And so I've got some very persuasive material there. The reason things are going poorly, if what they were doing now was working really well, then they wouldn't still be wondering what to do with their kid. Now, there are parents who say, if my spouse would just do it my way, this would all go better. But You know, y'all got to be on the same page. Just because a kid is better behaved in response to one parent who's going about doing things in a way that the other parent would never do things, that's the recipe for having people not be on the same page. We have got to come up with a way of doing things that both parents can be on board with, that both parents can do, so that both parents are on the same page. So I understand the mentality. He's well behaved with me. If the way he's well behaved with you is because of strategies that your significant other isn't going to use in this lifetime, then we're not there yet.
Right. That makes good sense. I guess this could be the last question, depending. Would you recommend having an older child fill out ALSUP themselves if they are older than, say, 12, rather than solely assessing from the parent's perspective?
Well, what we do with every kid is we have a conversation with them about the expectations they're having difficulty meeting. Now, we don't look at them and say, what are your unsolved problems? Because they don't know what an unsolved problem is. But we do say to them, what are people getting on your case about? See, if somebody's getting on the kid's case about something, then that something must be an unsolved problem, or they wouldn't be getting on his case about it. What are you getting in trouble for? Kids don't get in trouble for solved problems. They only get in trouble for unsolved problems. So while we are not formally using the ALSUP with kids of any age, we are gathering information from kids about the expectations they're having difficulty meeting. The hard part about the ALSUP is that the lagging skills are worded in the most casual language possible, but most of them don't lend themselves to casual language. So the lagging skills can be a little bit hard even for adults to understand, let alone a kid. That's why we don't stick the ALSUP in front of an older kid. But we do engage all kids in the process of helping us identify what expectations they're having difficulty meeting. We just don't do it by putting the ALSUP in front of them.
Right, right. This is a good one. I would hate to leave without this one being answered. My unlucky kid doesn't have empathy and is self-centered, so she doesn't give two hoots about my concerns. So how can I define my concerns in Plan B if she won't listen to my perspective?
Well, I'd have to know that kid a little bit better just to make sure that the way she's being described is the way I would describe her. The good news is that the kid actually doesn't have to care deeply about your concerns. Believe it or not, I find that most caregivers don't care deeply about the kid's concerns. The bar is not set that high. The bar is set at whether both parties are able to take each other's concerns into account. So caring is not where the bar is set. Taking each other's concerns into account is where the bar is set. I have worked with many, many kids who didn't care deeply about their caregivers' concerns, but who were able to engage productively in Plan B. The other thing I'll say about that is that kids who have their concerns heard, generally speaking, are significantly more receptive to listening to somebody else's concerns, but it doesn't happen overnight. Sometimes that takes a little while.
Right. Well, that'll have to be the last question. We're just about at the end of the hour. That was terrific, impassioned, insightful, really, really good.
Thank you very much
Ross,
for having me on.
Yeah, appreciate you for being here. And we're grateful for all of you being here today, too. Join us for our next webinar, Differently Wired, Raising Exceptional Kids in a Conventional World. That'll be on June 26th, and that will be, the expert will be Deborah Reber. So have a good day, everyone, and see you then.